In Windsurf Wave 3, we launched support for the Model Context Protocol, or MCP. This is a super powerful feature, but we've heard from a number of you that you're not really sure what MCP is, why it's important, or how to get started. So don't worry, we got you. In the next few minutes, we're going to go over what MCP is, how it fits into the picture, why it's important, and how you can get started with it in Windsurf today. First, let's do a little bit of review. What are agents? So we started off with this notion of a co-pilot, and an example of this is Codium's original chat functionality. Co-pilots take access to things like models, things like Sonnet 3.5, GPT-4o, the list goes on, and they give those models access to some kind of context. For Codium, that context is a deep understanding of your code base. And when you put those two things together, these co-pilots were really good at answering questions about your code base. But they couldn't do things like actually go out and edit your files, go out and suggest diffs. They couldn't do things like search the web or docs. And that's where agents come in. Agents basically took co-pilots, and in addition to models and context, they gave them access to tools. So today, Cascade in Windsurf is an agent that has access to a wide variety of tools. These things include creating files or editing files, searching through a vast number of files for particular keywords. It even has access to searching the web and particular doc sites. But often there are other data sources that we'd want to give Cascade access to, things like Slack, GitHub, Google Drive, and more. For example, we personally use Slack to do a lot of discussions around different design ideas, implementations, coding best practices, so on and so forth. And so there's a lot of times where it would be useful to have Cascade have access to Slack. And this is where MCP comes in. MCP is basically a standardized interface for giving AI agents like Cascade a way of communicating with other data sources. To Cascade, an MCP server is just another set of tools that it can use in its tool belt. MCP basically consists of a client, a server, and some remote or local data source. A local data source could be something on your file system, and a remote data source could be something like Slack, because we've got all these Slack conversations stored on slack.com. The client, or the thing that's actually using the information, is, in this case, Windsurf. So what's this thing in between? What is this server? Well, the server is just responsible for using some sort of web APIs to talk to Slack and communicate that information back to Cascade. Now, if that sounds complicated, that's okay because you don't actually have to make these servers yourself. These servers are just local processes running on your machine, and there are plenty of open source pre-built servers you can just download and run. I'll include the links to these two sources in the thread. So let's go back to our Slack example. Let's say that I've got a channel on Slack where I'm discussing coding best practices with my team, and I'd like Cascade to have access to that so it can consider those best practices when it writes code. So let's go ahead and see what it would be like to add a Slack MCP server to Cascade. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to head over to Slack, where I've got this channel called Slack MCP test, just for the sake of this video. And you can see that I've got a bunch of JavaScript coding standards written in here. Things like, hey, this is how I want to name variables, this is how I should handle constants, so on and so forth. And I'd like Cascade to have access to the contents in this channel. So what we can do now is we can go and we can download, or we can look at the instructions for how to set up Slack's MCP server. Remember that this is just a process that you run. Now, every MCP server is going to have slightly different instructions, and you'll be able to find these online. Here, the first thing that I have to do is actually create a really easy Slack app, which I've already done for the sake of this video. Once I've done that, all I need to do is take this snippet of JSON and add it to my client. So let's go ahead and copy this, and I'm going to go ahead and come over to Windsurf. Now in Windsurf, if you head over to Cascade, you'll see this little hammer icon, and you'll see that it'll say MCP, 0 available MCP servers. So let's go ahead and add an MCP server. I'll click on the icon, and on the right, you'll see a button called Configure. When you click Configure, it'll open up a file called mcpconfig.json. And this is where you can paste in your JSON snippet from earlier. So let's go ahead and paste that in. Now you'll notice that it requires a Slackbot token and a Slack team ID. I'm going to go ahead and enter these offline, and then I will see you in a second. Once you're done configuring your MCP server, you can go back to Cascade, go to the hammer icon, and you'll see that you have a available MCP server for Slack. And if you don't see it, just go ahead and hit refresh. But now let's go ahead and test it out. So as a reminder, we've got a bunch of coding best practices available here, and I want to make sure that Cascade has an understanding of those. So now I can just tell Cascade, what are my coding best practices for JavaScript? Check Slack channel. And I'll just give it the channel ID because this is a toy integration. And you can see immediately that it is called the MCP tool. It has gone to that Slack channel, got the channel history, and now it has access to everything that was in that Slack channel, including naming conventions, syntax and style, and more. And now what I can do is I can just say, use these coding standards to refactor the at index.ts file. Cool. And now it's using the information that was in Slack to actually improve my code that is in my code base. So this is the power of MCP. Hopefully this video helps you understand where it fits in, that it's easily approachable, and hopefully it helps you write better code.